The ruined marketplace was silent. Broken stalls leaning against shattered walls. Strange shadows dancing across the empty ground as the moonlight slipped through cracks in the ceiling of stone. A human soldier named Ethan walked carefully between the remains of what once had been a place full of life. Now there was only dust, torn cloth, and the faint echo of things long gone. His boots crunched softly against broken glass, each step louder than it should have been in the heavy silence. He had been moving for hours through the ruined city, following faint signs of movement, marks on the ground and whispers of survivors. The place smelled of smoke and rust, the kind of stench that clung to a battlefield long after the war was gone. His hand rested close to the hilt of his blade, his senses sharp, for in ruins like these danger lived behind every corner. Then, he heard it, a faint sound almost lost in the thick air, soft and trembling. A whisper. "I'm not clean," the voice said, weak and fragile. Ethan froze. His heart pounded, his ears straining to catch it again. He turned slowly, eyes scanning, the shadows between broken walls and collapsed stalls. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then he saw her. A figure crouched in the corner of a crumbled wall, wrapped in a dirty cloth, shaking as if from cold or fear. The girl looked small, fragile, almost like a ghost trapped in the ruins. Her glowing eyes reflected the moonlight, watching him with both fear and shame. She pressed herself back against the wall, clutching the cloth tightly as though it was the only shield she had. Ethan raised a hand, palm open, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. She shook her head, trembling harder, and whispered again. "I'm not clean, don't come close." Her words cut into him like a blade. He had heard many things on the battlefield. Screams of dying men, roars of alien beasts, the cries of children lost in the chaos. But the way she said those 3 words was different. It carried fear, shame, and something deeper, something that made his chest tighten. Slowly, Ethan stepped closer, his boots brushing against scattered stones. The girl's hands gripped the cloth tighter, her breathing quick and shallow. She wanted to push him away, yet she did not move, as though part of her wanted him to come closer. When he was only a few steps away, the cloth slipped from her hands. It fell to the ground in silence. Ethan's eyes widened. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment his heart nearly stopped. Beneath the torn covering, her skin was marked with strange, glowing patterns. They spread across her arms and shoulders, pulsing like veins of fire buried beneath her flesh. The marks moved faintly, alive, shifting as though they were breathing with her. The girl wrapped her arms around herself, turning away as if ashamed. "You see now," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This is why I'm not clean." Ethan's hand tightened on his blade, not to draw it but to steady himself. He had seen weapons, he had seen scars of battle. But this was something different. These marks were not natural, not something born of her people or his. They looked like wounds, of energy carved into her by something unnatural, something cruel. He crouched slightly, trying to meet her eyes. "What happened to you?" he asked softly. She shook her head and pressed her face against her knees. "They made me like this. They said I carry death. They said I carry disease. No one wants me near them. No one touches me." Her voice cracked, and she pressed harder against the wall, as if trying to disappear into the stone. The marks glowed faintly with every word she spoke, alive with her pain. Ethan felt a heaviness in his chest. He had been a soldier long enough to know cruelty when he saw it, and this girl was no monster, she was a victim. Yet his mind warned him, told him she could be dangerous, told him these marks were not safe. His training screamed at him to turn away, but his heart would not move. For a moment the silence between them grew thick, broken only by her trembling breath and the faint hum of the glowing marks. Ethan took another careful step closer, his voice calm, almost like a promise. "You are not alone now," he said. Her eyes lifted, glowing softly, filled with both fear and hope. The marks on her arms pulsed brighter, as if reacting to his words, alive with some strange energy. Ethan did not know what she truly was. He did not know what curse or power lived within her flesh. But in that moment he knew one thing. His path had crossed hers for a reason, and walking away was no longer possible. The ruins around them seemed to hold their breath, as though the city itself waited for what would happen next. The whisper that had drawn him here had now become the beginning of something far greater. And though his mind still screamed danger, his heart whispered another truth, that her secret would change everything. The ruined marketplace was silent, broken stalls leaning against shattered walls, strange shadows dancing across the empty ground as the moonlight slipped through cracks in the ceiling of stone. A human soldier named Ethan walked carefully between the remains of what once had been a place full of life. Now there was only dust, torn cloth, and the faint echo of things long gone. His boots crunched softly against broken glass, each step louder than it should have been in the heavy silence. He had been moving for hours through the ruined city, following faint signs of movement, marks on the ground and whispers of survivors. The place smelled of smoke and rust, the kind of stench that clung to a battlefield long after the war was gone. His hand rested close to the hilt of his blade, his senses sharp, for in ruins like these danger lived behind every corner. Then, he heard it, a faint sound almost lost in the thick air, soft and trembling. A whisper. "I'm not clean," the voice said, weak and fragile. Ethan froze. His heart pounded, his ears straining to catch it again. He turned slowly, eyes scanning, the shadows between broken walls and collapsed stalls. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then he saw her. A figure crouched in the corner of a crumbled wall, wrapped in a dirty cloth, shaking as if from cold or fear. The girl looked small, fragile, almost like a ghost trapped in the ruins. Her glowing eyes reflected the moonlight, watching him with both fear and shame. She pressed herself back against the wall, clutching the cloth tightly as though it was the only shield she had. Ethan raised a hand, palm open, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. She shook her head, trembling harder, and whispered again. "I'm not clean, don't come close." Her words cut into him like a blade. He had heard many things on the battlefield. Screams of dying men, roars of alien beasts, the cries of children lost in the chaos. But the way she said those 3 words was different. It carried fear, shame, and something deeper, something that made his chest tighten. Slowly, Ethan stepped closer, his boots brushing against scattered stones. The girl's hands gripped the cloth tighter, her breathing quick and shallow. She wanted to push him away, yet she did not move, as though part of her wanted him to come closer. When he was only a few steps away, the cloth slipped from her hands. It fell to the ground in silence. Ethan's eyes widened. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment his heart nearly stopped. Beneath the torn covering, her skin was marked with strange, glowing patterns. They spread across her arms and shoulders, pulsing like veins of fire buried beneath her flesh. The marks moved faintly, alive, shifting as though they were breathing with her. The girl wrapped her arms around herself, turning away as if ashamed. "You see now," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This is why I'm not clean." Ethan's hand tightened on his blade, not to draw it but to steady himself. He had seen weapons, he had seen scars of battle. But this was something different. These marks were not natural, not something born of her people or his. They looked like wounds, of energy carved into her by something unnatural, something cruel. He crouched slightly, trying to meet her eyes. "What happened to you?" he asked softly. She shook her head and pressed her face against her knees. "They made me like this. They said I carry death. They said I carry disease. No one wants me near them. No one touches me." Her voice cracked, and she pressed harder against the wall, as if trying to disappear into the stone. The marks glowed faintly with every word she spoke, alive with her pain. Ethan felt a heaviness in his chest. He had been a soldier long enough to know cruelty when he saw it, and this girl was no monster, she was a victim. Yet his mind warned him, told him she could be dangerous, told him these marks were not safe. His training screamed at him to turn away, but his heart would not move. For a moment, the silence between them grew thick, broken only by her trembling breath and the faint hum of the glowing marks. Ethan took another careful step closer, his voice calm, almost like a promise. "You are not alone now," he said. Her eyes lifted, glowing softly, filled with both fear and hope. The marks on her arms pulsed brighter, as if reacting to his words, alive with some strange energy. Ethan did not know what she truly was. He did not know what curse or power lived within her flesh, but in that moment he knew one thing. His path had crossed hers for a reason, and walking away was no longer possible. The ruins around them seemed to hold their breath, as though the city itself waited for what would happen next. The whisper that had drawn him here had now become the beginning of something far greater. And though his mind still screamed danger, his heart whispered another truth, that her secret would change everything. The silence of the ruined market pressed around them like a heavy blanket. Ethan stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the glowing marks that pulsed across the alien girl's arms and shoulders. They were not scars, not paint, not tattoos. They were alive, shifting like rivers of light under her skin. Every pulse seemed to echo with her heartbeat, and every faint glow lit the fear in her eyes. The girl pulled her knees closer to her chest, trying to hide from his stare. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Now you see why no one comes near me. They call me cursed. They call me unclean." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had seen soldiers marked by war, men broken by wounds that never healed. But this was different. The mark seemed to breathe, crawling faintly across her body like living fire. He took a slow step forward, careful not to frighten her further, his hand still resting on his blade, though he had no wish to use it. "What are they?" he asked quietly. Her eyes darted away from him. She shook her head, clutching her arms tightly. "I don't know all of it. Only that they were burned into me. Only that they make me dangerous." The way she said dangerous made Ethan's heart twist. She did not sound like someone proud of power. She sounded like someone who carried a burden too heavy for her small frame. He crouched down so that his eyes met hers, though she refused to look directly at him. "Tell me your name," he said, hoping to pull her away from her fear. For a long moment she stayed silent. Then her lips parted, her voice so faint it almost vanished in the wind. "Lyra," she whispered. "Lyra." A name soft and fragile, like the girl herself. Ethan repeated it once under his breath, grounding her in the moment, letting her know he saw her as more than a cursed shell. Lyra's eyes flickered to him at last, and he caught the pain hidden within them. "They said I was chosen," she murmured, "but not chosen for anything good. They dragged me from my home, they locked me away, and they carved the light into me. Every time I breathe, I feel it move. It is not mine, it is theirs, but I cannot take it out." Her hands trembled against her legs, the glowing marks on her wrists pulsing brighter, as though responding to her emotions. Ethan watched carefully, his instincts alive, ready to react if the light turned hostile. But it did not explode or burn. It only glowed, soft and sorrowful, as though it shared her pain. "You said they?" Ethan asked, his voice calm, steady. "Who are they?" Lyra flinched at the question, pressing her back against the cracked wall. Her eyes darted around the ruins as if shadows themselves might hear her. Then she whispered with dread, "The raiders, the ones who hunt the broken worlds. They came. In ships of black steel, they took children, they chained us, they marked me because I was weak enough to survive the pain. The others they did not survive." Ethan's chest burned with anger. He had fought raiders before, he had seen what they did to the helpless, but never had he seen something like this. The thought of a child being forced into such torment filled him with fury. Lyra's breath shook. "When the marks glow, they fear me. When they glow too bright, they beat me. They covered me with cloth so no one would see, so no one would know what I carried. I was left behind because they said I was ruined, not worth the chains anymore. But even ruined, they feared me." She pressed her face into her knees, her voice cracking. So I hide. I whisper to warn strangers. I tell them not to touch me. Because one day, the marks will kill. That is what they told me. The weight of her words hung heavy between them. Ethan stared at her small frame, her trembling hands, and the soft glow that pulsed like a warning light in the night. He felt the edge of fear scrape against his thoughts, the voice of survival telling him to walk away, to leave her to her fate before the danger swallowed him too. But when he looked into her eyes, when he saw the tears she tried to hide, he could not turn. He reached out slowly, not to touch her, but to close the distance between them. "You are not a curse," he said firmly, his voice carrying strength she did not believe she had. "What they did to you does not define you. You are not ruined." Lyra's breath caught, her glowing eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, the marks on her skin pulsed brighter, casting faint light across the broken walls. She shook her head quickly, whispering again, almost begging. "Don't say that. If you stay, they will come. They always come." Ethan's hand tightened around the hilt of his blade. He understood now. This was no ordinary secret. If raiders had done this, then raiders would return. She was right. Danger was coming. But he also knew something else. If he left her here, she would not survive the night. The ruins seemed colder as the wind swept through, carrying the weight of her confession. Lyra pulled the cloth back over her shoulders, trying to bury the glowing marks once more, but it was too late. Ethan had seen, and now that he had, he knew he could never forget. He rose to his feet, his eyes scanning the shadows around them, his body tense. The faint hum of the mark still echoed in his ears, a reminder that the girl before him carried both fear and power. Lyra whispered again, her voice soft but heavy with dread. "They will come for me, and when they do, you will regret standing near." Ethan's heart pounded as he stared into the night. He did not regret it. Not yet. And deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The ruined market was still. But inside Lyra's trembling voice, the ghosts of her past began to awaken. Ethan stood near her, tense yet patient, watching the girl struggle with words that seemed heavier than her small frame. Her glowing marks dimmed and flared like an unsteady flame, each pulse echoing the storm inside her. She hugged her knees tighter, her eyes lost in shadows that were not from the ruins around her, but from the memories inside her mind. When she finally spoke, her voice was broken, almost as if every word was dragged out of her soul. "They came at night," she whispered. "The sky burned with their ships. My people were asleep, children still dreaming. The ground shook when the raiders landed. Before the stars faded, the chains were already on us." Ethan's chest tightened. He had heard many survivors speak of raids, but the way she described, it made his stomach twist. He imagined fire tearing through a peaceful home, children ripped away from families, and cold hands throwing them into cages. "They did not speak," Lyra continued, her voice shaking. "They only struck. They bound us in metal that cut our skin, collars that burned our necks. Anyone who cried out was silenced with blades. They dragged us through the streets, over the bodies of those who fought. The air was filled with smoke, and the screams never stopped. That night never ended for me." She pressed her hands against her ears as if the echoes of that night still screamed there. The glowing marks on her arms pulsed faster, their rhythm matching her trembling breath. Ethan knelt beside her, keeping his voice calm. "You don't have to tell me everything at once." But Lyra shook her head fiercely. "You must know, or you will never understand what I carry." Her eyes, glowing with sorrow, lifted toward him for the first time without shame. "They kept us in cages, rows and rows of children all packed together, crying, calling for mothers who would never come. They gave us no water, no food, only the chains, only the fear. Days passed, maybe weeks, I don't know. Time did not exist in the dark." Her voice cracked as she remembered, yet she did not stop. When the doors finally opened, they did not free us. They dragged us into a chamber of cold light, and the air smelled like burning metal. One by one, they pulled us from the cages, forced us onto tables, and carved into us. I was chosen because my body was weak, because I screamed but did not die. They cut me open, poured the fire inside, and sealed it with light. That is when the marks appeared. That is when I stopped being a child. Her shoulders shook as silent. Tears slid down her cheeks. The marks on her skin glowed brighter, reacting to her emotions as though alive with the memory of her suffering. Ethan clenched his fists, fury rising in him like fire. He could picture the cold cruelty of the raiders, turning children into weapons, stripping away their innocence for experiments. His throat burned with rage, but he forced himself to stay steady for her. Lyra continued, her words now rushing as though she feared if she stopped, the memories would consume her. The others did not survive. Some burned from the inside, their bodies unable to hold the light. Others begged for death and the raiders gave it. Only I remained, not because I was strong, but because I was weak enough to be useful. They told me that my pain would serve them, that my suffering was their creation. I became their tool, their secret. Her voice fell to a whisper. But even tools can break, and when they saw the marks would not fade, when they saw I was not fully theirs, they called me ruined. They wrapped me in cloth to hide me, they chained me in the corner of their ship, and one night they left me behind like garbage, not worth carrying anymore. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing into her palms. That is why I said I am not clean, because everything they touched became poison, because everything they gave me is still inside me. I am their mistake, their broken weapon. Ethan stared at her, his chest heavy with sorrow and rage. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she was not poison, that she was not broken, but the weight of her words held him silent for a moment. He could see the scars of chain still faintly etched into her wrists, the way her shoulders flinched even in the safety of silence, and he knew her pain was carved deep into her soul. Finally he spoke, his voice firm, steady, carrying the strength she had been denied. You are not their weapon. You are not their mistake. What they did to you is unforgivable, but it does not decide who you are. Lyra lowered her hands, her eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time, a faint glimmer of something other than fear appeared there. Hope, fragile, trembling, but alive. The marks on her arms pulsed again, brighter now, as though stirred by his words. For a heartbeat, the ruined market seemed alive with their glow, the shadows bending under the light. Ethan did not move away. He stayed close, letting her see that he was not afraid, letting her know that her chains were not her identity. Lyra stared at him in silence, the memory of chains, still heavy, but a new thought beginning to form, that maybe she was more than what they made her, and in that fragile moment a bond was forged, one born not from power but from shared defiance against the cruelty of the universe. Ethan stood in silence, his eyes locked on Lyra. The glow of her mark still pulsed faintly beneath her skin, soft waves of light that rose and fell with every breath she took. Her story echoed in his mind like thunder that refused to fade. He had seen war, he had seen death, he had seen cruelty, yet nothing compared to what this girl had endured. She was not simply a survivor. She was a scar given life, forced to carry the weight of a nightmare that never ended. His instincts screamed at him. She was dangerous, cursed, unstable. Everything about the strange marks warned him to stay away. The soldier in him knew the rules. Never carry a burden that could destroy you. Never trust the unknown. Never let compassion blind reason. Yet standing there, looking at her trembling form, Ethan felt the lines of those rules begin to blur. Lyra kept her eyes down, the cloth pulled tightly across her shoulders again, hiding the light beneath. Her voice was faint, almost broken. You should go. If you stay near me, you will suffer. Everyone who stays near me suffers. The words hit him hard because a part of him believed it. He thought of his unit scattered across the battlefield, of comrades who had fallen because of mercy shown to the wrong enemy. He thought of the missions drilled into him. Survive at any cost. Cut loose anything that drags you down. He knew what the sensible choice was. Turn around. Walk away. leave her to her fate before her curse became his death. But then she lifted her eyes, and for the first time he saw more than fear in them. He saw a silent plea, a flicker of desperation she could not hide. And that was when his heart betrayed his mind. Ethan turned away for a moment, pacing across the broken stones, his fists clenching and unclenching. He argued with himself in silence. If I walk away, she dies. If I stay, I may die with her. She is a weapon, a curse, but she is also a girl, a child stolen from her life. Do I save myself, or do I save her? The soldier in him shouted for logic. The human in him whispered for mercy. And in that storm of thought, he realized that he was no longer deciding between survival and death. He was deciding what kind of man he truly was. He looked back at Lyra, and for the first time allowed himself to see her not as cursed, but as someone who had been wronged. The glow on her skin was frightening, yes, but it was not her choice, not her fault. She had been chained, beaten, left to rot. To abandon her now would not only doom her, it would mean he had accepted the same cruelty the raiders had forced on her. Lyra seemed to sense his hesitation. She pulled back against the wall, her voice sharp with fear. Don't look at me like that. Don't think you can save me. No one can save me. Her words were a shield, but behind them was a trembling hope she could not kill. Ethan could see it, the part of her that wanted him to prove himself wrong, to stay despite the danger. He stepped closer, his voice low but firm. You are not their weapon. You are not their curse. You are Lyra. And right now, you are not alone. She flinched, her eyes wet with tears she refused to let fall. Her lips parted as though she wanted to answer, but the words refused to come. Ethan stood straight, his hand brushing against the hilt of his blade. He knew the raiders would return. If Lyra was right, they always came back for their broken creations, hunting the shadows for the mistakes they left behind. Protecting her would not only mean risking his life, but drawing the fury of hunters far stronger than either of them. His thoughts wrestled once more. If he stayed, he might die. If he left, she certainly would. He thought of the oath he once swore, as a soldier and to protect the innocent, to stand for those who could not stand for themselves. That oath had been buried under blood and orders long ago. But here in the ruins, facing a trembling girl with glowing scars, the memory of that promise returned to him. Ethan drew a slow breath and let the decision settle in his chest. If they come, he said firmly, they will not take you again. Not while I stand. Lyra stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Why? She asked, her voice breaking. Why would you risk yourself for me? His answer came without hesitation. Because someone should have. For a moment, silence wrapped around them, heavy but no longer suffocating. Lyra's tears finally slipped down her cheeks, and her hands loosened from the cloth. The marks beneath her skin glowed faintly but softer now, as though responding not to fear but to something else, trust, or the fragile beginning of it. Ethan did not know what would come next. He did not know if he had made the right choice. All he knew was that his heart had spoken louder than his fear, and deep in the ruins, in that fragile bond between a soldier and a broken child of fate, a storm was already gathering, one that neither of them could yet see. The ruined market had become a battlefield. Shattered walls echoed with the clash of steel and the crackle of alien weapons. Dust filled the air, mixing with smoke from the blasts that scorched the ground. Ethan stood at the center of it, his blade gleaming under the faint moonlight, his chest heaving with each breath. Around him, fallen hunters lay sprawled across the broken stones, but more still advanced, their armor glinting, their movements sharp and merciless. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, her hands gripping the cloth that barely covered the glowing marks. She could feel every strike, every surge of energy, as though the battle itself stirred the light inside her veins. The marks pulsed violently, and she fought to keep them under control. Fear clawed at her chest, not just for Ethan but for herself. If the power inside her broke loose, it could kill them both. Ethan parried another strike, the clash sending sparks into the air. His arms ached, his shoulders burned, but his eyes stayed locked on the enemy before him. He was bleeding from shallow cuts, his body battered from the force of blows, yet he refused to give an inch. Every time his blade rose, it was not for his own life but for the fragile girl behind him. The leader of the raiders barked orders, his voice carrying through the smoke. Do not let him breathe. Break him. Take the girl. 2 hunters lunged, at once, their blades sweeping from opposite sides. Ethan dropped low, rolling across the ground, his blade flashing upward as he cut through the leg of one. The hunter screamed, collapsing in a spray of sparks and blood. But the second struck, hard, the blow grazing Ethan's side. Pain seared across his ribs, and for a heartbeat his vision blurred. Lyra cried out, her hands reaching toward him. Ethan, stop. You cannot win. But Ethan forced himself upright, gritting his teeth through the pain. He lifted his blade again, his voice rough but steady. I have already won. You are still alive. The words struck Lyra's heart harder than any blade. Her chest tightened, tears burning her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever seen her as worth protecting. The marks flared brighter, feeding on the storm of emotion inside her. The leader stepped forward now, his weapon glowing like a sun of destruction. His strikes came faster, heavier, each one shaking Ethan to his core. Ethan blocked 1, 2, 3, but the fourth sent him staggering back, his blade nearly torn from his grip. He dropped to one knee, blood dripping down his arm, his breath ragged. The leader loomed over him, raising his weapon for the final strike. You fought well, human, he sneered, but you fight for nothing. The girl is ours, and you will die in the dirt. Ethan looked up, his eyes burning with defiance. She is not yours, not now, not ever. Before the weapon could fall, the glow from Lyra's body erupted. The marks flared like living fire, bathing the ruins in blinding light. The hunters stumbled back, shielding their eyes, their weapons faltering. The leader cursed, turning his mask toward her. Lyra stood trembling, her body glowing like a star trapped in flesh. She shook her head violently, clutching her chest as the power surged out of control. No, she whispered. I cannot. I will kill him too. But Ethan's voice cut through the chaos, strong and unshaken. Lyra, listen to me. You are not their weapon. You are not their curse. You are more than what they made you. Her eyes widened, tears spilling down her cheeks. The light raged inside her, wild and hungry, but his words reached her heart. She clenched her fists, forcing the energy to bend, forcing herself to take control. The ground trembled beneath her, feet, cracks spreading through the stones as the air hummed with raw power. The hunters panicked, their leader shouting for them to retreat. But it was too late. Lyra unleashed a wave of light not toward Ethan but outward, driving the hunters back like leaves in a storm. Their weapons shattered, their bodies thrown against the walls with crushing force. The ruins shook as the power roared, yet Ethan stood untouched, the glow bending around him as if her will had chosen to spare him. When the light finally faded, silence returned. Smoke drifted through the broken market, the ground scorched and cracked, the hunters lying, unconscious or dead. The leader staggered to his feet, his mask broken, his voice filled with rage and fear. He glared at Lyra, then at Ethan. This is not the end. She cannot escape what she is. Neither of you can. With that, he fled into the shadows, leaving the ruins behind. Lyra collapsed to her knees, her body trembling, the glow of her marks dimming once more. She looked at her hands, horrified at the destruction she had caused, tears falling freely. You see, she whispered, I am dangerous. I should not exist. Ethan staggered to her side, blood still dripping from his wounds, his face pale with exhaustion. He dropped to one knee beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. You are alive. You saved us both. That is not danger, that is strength. Lyra lifted her eyes, searching his face for doubt, but all she found was conviction. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe she was not only a curse. And in the shattered silence of the battlefield, as the moonlight touched the ruins, Ethan knew his fight was not over. The raiders would return. the danger, would rise again, but he had made his choice. He would stand by her until the end. The ruins were quiet once more, the echoes of battle fading into the night. Smoke drifted lazily through cracks in the broken walls, and the stench of scorched stone clung to the air. Ethan leaned against a shattered pillar, blood seeping from his wounds, but his grip on his blade never loosened. His eyes stayed fixed on Lyra, who knelt in the rubble, her body trembling, her glowing marks dim and faint. She had saved them both, yet she looked at her hands with horror, as if they carried only death. Her voice broke the silence, soft and filled with shame. "You saw what I am. You saw what I can do. This is why they called me cursed. This is why no one can stand near me." Ethan pushed away from the pillar, stumbling slightly but refusing to fall. He knelt beside her, resting one hand gently on her shoulder. "I saw more than that. I saw you fight to protect, not to destroy. You had the power to end everything, yet you chose to spare me. That is not the mark of a monster." Lyra shook her head violently, tears streaking down her face. "You do not understand. These marks, they are not mine. They are not meant to protect. They are a weapon, built to kill, sealed into me by their science. Every time I breathe, it waits. Every time I feel, it stirs. One day, it will break free, and when it does, it will not spare you, no matter how much I wish it would." Her words hit Ethan hard, but he did not withdraw his hand. Instead, he leaned closer, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Then I will stand with you until that day, and if it comes, I will face it. You are not alone anymore." The marks pulsed faintly, as if responding to his words. Lyra's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face. "Why?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why would you carry this burden? You could walk away, you could live, you could forget me." Ethan's answer came without hesitation. "Because you were never meant to carry it alone. Because someone should have stood for you long ago, and if no one else will, then I will." Lyra's breath caught, and for the first time she let herself cry without hiding. The tears fell freely, carrying years of pain that had been locked behind chains and silence. She buried her face against her knees, and Ethan stayed there, silent but unshaken, his presence a shield against the shadows that threatened to swallow her. The night stretched on, but eventually, her sobs quieted. She lifted her head slowly, her eyes glowing softly, no longer with terror but with something fragile. Hope. "There is more," she whispered, her voice trembling. "More than what I told you. The marks are not only scars, they are a key. The raiders said I carry the power to destroy a city, maybe a world. They said if the light is awakened fully, it cannot be stopped. That is why they wanted me. That is why they fear me. Not because I am weak, but because I am too strong." Ethan felt the weight of her words settle over him like stone. He looked at the marks, glowing faintly across her arms, and for the first time he understood why the raiders had chained her, why they had hidden her under cloth. She was not just their victim, she was their weapon, and if unleashed, she could shatter everything. Yet when he looked at her trembling form, at the tears, still fresh on her cheeks, he saw no weapon. He saw a girl who had been denied choice, a life stolen and twisted by cruelty. "Then we will make sure it never awakens for them," he said firmly. "If there is power inside you, it will be yours, not theirs. They cannot decide who you are, only you can." Lyra's lips parted, her eyes wide as though his words had struck something deep inside her. "You believe that? Even after what you saw, you still believe I am more than this?" Ethan nodded without hesitation. "I do." The marks flared suddenly, a burst of light sweeping across her skin, but this time it did not burn or lash out. It pulsed steady, strong, like a heartbeat. Lyra stared at her hands, stunned. For the first time, the glow did not feel like a chain. It felt like it belonged to her. The ruins glowed faintly with her light, and in that moment she realized what Ethan had given her. Not freedom from the marks, not an escape from danger, but something greater. A choice. She looked at him, her voice breaking but no longer with fear. "Then I will choose. I will not be their weapon. I will not be their curse. I will be more than what they made me. Ethan allowed himself the faintest smile, though his body still bled and ached. That is all I needed to hear. The night grew quiet, the stars above watching like silent witnesses. The raiders would return. The danger would never truly end. But for now the ruins held something new. The fragile beginning of trust, the first spark of freedom, and the promise that no matter what came, neither of them would face it alone. And, as Lyra's light pulsed steady against the darkness, Ethan felt his heart steady too, knowing that this bond, forged in fear, in pain, and in defiance, would change both their fates forever.